There are three levels of power in this world. First, the politicians you vote for. Then, the corporations you know by name. But above them both sits a hidden tier of power. Families who quietly control it all. They are said to operate parallel power structures beyond the reach of democracy. Through secretive meetings and global forums, they run shadow governments, shape markets, or even wars. Some believe they engineer crises to tighten control. We'll get into this soon enough, but for now you only need to know this. From bankrolling Hitler's war machine to financing the global vaccine rollout, one Swedish family's fingerprints appear again and again. You'll sleep easier if you turn this off now, but if you keep watching, you'll see how real power works, and you'll never see the world the same way again. Out of these cars step the world's most powerful figures, multinational CEOs, heads of state, intelligence chiefs, tech billionaires who control how billions communicate.
The Bilderberg Group is a meeting of the most influential people in Europe and North America. Wall Street investors, business moguls, politicians, royalty, they're all coming together and keeping the media and everyone else out. What are they discussing? What are they plotting?
For 70 years, this meeting has operated under the Chatham House rule. You can use the information, but you can never say who said it. Perfect secrecy, perfect power. Since its existence, the Bilderberg Summit has been widely whispered about in conspiracy circles. Nowadays, the internet explodes with theories. Reptilian elites, secret cabals, a single world government pulling the strings. Most dismiss these as fantasy, but where there is smoke, there is some fire, and the truth sometimes can be closer than you would think.
To say we were striving for a one-world government is exaggerated, but not wholly unfair.
Not wholly unfair from a man who helped design the system. But if you watch this pattern closely, you'll understand why these theories exist.
All right, here's the answer. I happened to be in Europe then on my way to Russia. I was invited to go to Bilderberg by Vernon Jordan, a friend of mine and a genuine hero of the civil rights movement.
Bill Clinton attends Bilderberg in 1991. 2 years later, President of the United States. Tony Blair attends in 1993. Four years later, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Barack Obama, attended as senator. Hillary Clinton, multiple times as Secretary of State. So is all of this only a coincidence? Or the world's most exclusive job interview? We'll never know for sure, but what we do know is this. According to leaked agendas, the 2024 Madrid meeting focused on AI warfare, digital currencies, and population management, the future of 8 billion people, decided by 150, none elected by you. But in the secluded world of Bilderberg, most of these people, presidents, prime ministers, tech CEOs, they're all junior to one family that's been here for longer than anyone. While others come and go, the Wallenbergs remain, because they're not guests, they're the hosts. While American presidents serve maximum 8 years, the Wallenbergs have maintained their seat for 7 decades. And they represent an empire, from the vaccines in your arm, to the networks carrying your data, to the weapons defending your allies. 1 million employees, $275 billion in controlled assets. Zero Forbes appearances, For a family whose power depends on invisibility, a meeting where nothing can be attributed is the perfect forum. While Americans watch Congress debate, while Europeans watch Parliament vote, critics argue the most influential discussions may happen in rooms like these. No votes, no minutes, no democratic oversight. What some political scientists describe as shadow governance, where policy directions are shaped before they reach public debate. Despite controlling companies with hundreds of billions, the Wallenbergs receive remarkably little mainstream media attention. This systematic invisibility raises questions. How does such massive influence remain largely unexamined? Google searches yield millions of results for lesser billionaires, but minimal coverage for the Wallenbergs. Rather than traditional lobbying, they operate through exclusive networks where leaders participate as attendees, not decision makers. They don't follow global trends, they create them and position themselves to benefit from them. They don't just react to crises, they consistently position themselves to profit regardless of outcomes. But to understand how a Swedish banking dynasty ends up controlling global affairs, we need to go back to where it all started, because it started with one powerful man. June 1971. A car sits by a Swedish lake in the early morning mist. Inside, a body. Marcus Wallenberg Jr.'s son, Mark Wallenberg, is found dead at age 46. The official statement says suicide, depression, personal struggles, a tragic loss for a prominent family. But those who knew Mark remember something else. A man who had started asking questions about the family business, who had begun to understand the true scope of what his family had built, who was struggling with the weight of inheriting an empire built on engineered human suffering. Some researchers question the official narrative, though no evidence has emerged to contradict it. What remains undisputed is the timing. A man grappling with moral questions about his family legacy, found dead as the empire continued to expand. But the family legacy was designed for conquest from the very beginning, and sometimes they even sacrifice their own children. Running a business today? Then you already know, if you're not on social media, you're invisible. Social media isn't just about likes and followers anymore. It's about visibility, connection, and trust. It's where your audience hangs out, where first impressions are made, and where opportunities grow. But let's be honest, managing it all takes time, creativity, and strategy. That's where Sintra AI comes in. Sintra handles everything for you, from creating posts and images to writing catchy captions and publishing. You approve it, and Sintra takes care of the rest, automatically publishing across all your platforms. No stress, no missed posts, just consistent professional social media presence every day. And if you ever need help beyond social media, Sintra's got you covered. Our dedicated team of 12 skilled AI employees can support you in areas like sales, marketing, emails, operations, content, and more. With Sintra AI, you're not just keeping up with social media, but you're staying ahead of it. Let Sintra handle the busy work so you can focus on growing your business. Andrei Oskar Wallenberg faces the ultimate enemy even the most powerful man cannot escape: death. But unlike most men in their final moments, he is not reflecting on his life. Andrei's only concern is the future. He knows that the Wallenberg legacy he spent a lifetime building must now pass to his sons. A legacy that was never supposed to come this far. But how did we get here? The story begins 70 years earlier. Growing up in early 19th century Sweden, Andrei Oskar Wallenberg faces severe limitations. Foreign banking is dominated by German and British houses. Swedish finance is primitive, agricultural focused. Forced to find another way to survive, Andre turns to modern banking innovation, and it quickly becomes clear he's no ordinary businessman. In fact, Andre's approach to finance is revolutionary for its time. Andre isn't just very good, he is exceptional. And this exceptional reputation eventually opens doors that change everything. Andre's skills catch the eye of Swedish political elite, and he soon goes on to serve in parliament while running his bank. This dual role catapults Andre into a new league. But what truly sets him apart from other bankers is his specialty: crisis profiteering. Through strategic positioning during economic downturns, Andre helps finance Sweden's infrastructure transformation. This move elevates his wife and children from middle-class origins to Sweden's financial elite. By the 1870s, the transformation is remarkable. Andre controlled Swedish railways, steel production, and major industrial development. But for Andre Oskar Wallenberg, that's not nearly enough. He wants more, much more. Wealth is fleeting. What he wants is immortality, a dynasty that will outlast nations and empires. To achieve that vision, he needs to think bigger, beyond Sweden. The Wallenbergs must spread across Europe, and to really exert influence, his system must become global. And so in his final moments in 1886, Andre passes on not just wealth, but his vision. He tells his sons of a simple yet clear mission. With these words, the idea of founding a European financial network is born. He couldn't have imagined the monster he created. His dream would make the Wallenbergs one of history's most powerful families, and one of its most controversial. January 1933, Adolf Hitler rises to power, and across Europe, most families are doing one of two things. They're either fleeing or they are resisting. But the Wallenbergs, well, they see something completely different. They see the ultimate business opportunity. So here's what happens next. Within just a few months, Marcus Wallenberg Jr. starts establishing banking relationships with Nazi Germany. Now, we're not talking about just simple loans here. We're talking about specialized financial services for a regime that's actively planning for war. And this isn't just any regime, right? This is a machine that's been designed from the ground up for conquest. So as Hitler starts building his war machine, Swedish neutrality becomes the perfect cover. Ball bearings flow to Germany, steel production ramps up, weapons components get shipped out. Basically everything the Wehrmacht needs to function is flowing through Swedish companies. But what happens next? Well, that reveals the true scope of this collaboration. And honestly, it's darker than you might think. We're now in 1942. The Holocaust has reached industrial scale. And according to official US Treasury investigations, Wallenberg banks are processing stolen Jewish assets, effectively converting genocide into quarterly profits. Now, before you think this is just speculation or conspiracy theory stuff, let me be clear, these aren't wild theories. These are official government accusations from the United States Treasury Department. But wait a minute, how does a Swedish banking family end up becoming Hitler's financial partner in the first place? Well, that story actually goes back decades. See, after Andre Oskar died in 1886, his sons started expanding across Europe. They perfected this whole crisis profiteering model during World War I, selling to all sides while Sweden stayed nice and neutral. Then by the 1920s, they had built what you might call the perfect system for shady dealings. Shell companies, anonymous accounts, completely untraceable transfers. So when Hitler comes along and needs financial partners who can operate in the shadows, well, guess who's perfectly positioned and ready to go? That's right, the Wallenbergs. Fast forward to 1945, the war is ending and the US Treasury Department decides to make it official. They issue formal accusations of Nazi collaboration. They block Wallenberg assets. They create a full-blown diplomatic confrontation. Suddenly, the Swedish government is facing serious international pressure to investigate its most powerful family. But here's where the story takes a turn that's honestly heartbreaking. Because while Marcus Jr. is financing genocide, there's another member of this same family doing something completely different. His distant cousin, Raoul Wallenberg, is risking absolutely everything to save Jewish lives in Budapest. Think about that for a second. The same family name, two completely opposite choices. One man funding evil, another one fighting with his life.
People whose loved ones die in a war or disappear feel a degree of reassurance once they know where their loved ones are buried. And we don't know. We don't know the cause of death, the time of death, and where his remains are. I'm trying to focus on justice, peace, love and charity rather than blood and gore and vengeance. But I haven't forgiven and I haven't forgotten.
And then in January 1945, something tragic happens. Raoul disappears in Soviet custody, never to return. So the hero vanishes, but the collaborators, they survive and thrive. And that, unfortunately, is just the mathematics of how power works in this world. When the post-war investigations are finally completed, they reveal the full scope of what happened. We're talking millions in Nazi gold that was processed, stolen Jewish assets that were laundered, Holocaust profits that were distributed. But here's the thing that really tells you how the world works. By 1948, Cold War politics start trumping justice. The assets get quietly returned. The investigations get quietly closed. And the lesson? Well, the lesson gets learned very well. The lesson is this: systematic evil can be incredibly profitable as long as you have the right political connections. And that lesson, it guides the family to this day. Some people argue this established the template for all modern crisis profiteering. Others claim it was just business as usual for wartime. But here's the thing about the Nazi collaboration. That was just the beginning. What they learned about crisis engineering during genocide, they were about to perfect during the next big opportunity, the Cold War. 50 years of orchestrated conflict, two superpowers going at each other, and one Swedish family positioned to control both sides. February 1945, the Yalta Conference. Three men sit around a table dividing the world into spheres of influence while the war against Hitler still rages. Stalin wants Eastern Europe. Roosevelt wants democratic ideals respected. Churchill wants the British Empire preserved. They compromise by carving Europe in half. To the world, this looks like the messy politics of victory. To the Wallenbergs, watching from Stockholm, this looks like the opportunity of a lifetime. Because while world leaders see ideological conflict brewing between capitalism and communism, the Wallenbergs see something infinitely more profitable. A conflict that could be managed, prolonged, and milked for decades. They had just spent 12 years making Hitler dependent on Swedish supplies, proving that even genocide could become a business model. Now they would spend the next 50 years making both superpowers equally dependent. The setup is perfect. Two superpowers with completely opposite ideologies, both convinced they are fighting for the survival of civilization itself, both willing to spend whatever it takes to win, and Sweden, officially neutral, positioned right between them. The perfect middleman for a family that has mastered the art of selling to all sides. While American and Soviet leaders are choosing sides and drawing battle lines, the Wallenbergs are choosing profits and erasing borders. Their strategy is brutally simple: fund both communist expansion and Western resistance, ensuring that every action creates reactions requiring more funding from both sides. Swedish neutrality isn't just a political stance, it's a business strategy that provides perfect cover for what some researchers call the greatest dual-side profiteering scheme in history.
The whole place lit up.
The atomic age begins, and suddenly both superpowers are locked in an existential race for nuclear supremacy. Whoever gets the bomb first wins everything. Whoever falls behind faces annihilation. But what if neither side wins? What if they stay locked in permanent competition, spending trillions on weapons they can never actually use? Documents suggest that Wallenberg mining companies supplied uranium to both American and Soviet nuclear programs, using Sweden's neutral status to legally export materials that would become weapons of mass destruction on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Financial analysts note the pattern. Every American nuclear advance was matched by a Soviet breakthrough within months, keeping both sides locked in what they called mutually assured destruction, but what the Wallenbergs called mutually assured dependency. June 1948, Secretary of State George Marshall announces the most ambitious reconstruction program in history. Billions of American dollars to rebuild war-torn Europe and stop the spread of communism. It's sold to the American public as charity and strategy, but financial records reveal something more calculated. Wallenberg companies somehow managed to dominate reconstruction contracts across Western Europe, while simultaneously expanding their operations in the Soviet sphere. They are not just profiting from Marshall Plan money. Evidence suggests they helped structure the plan itself to require Swedish industrial capacity. American taxpayers fund European reconstruction, but that money flows through companies that make both sides dependent on Wallenberg technology, creating economic leverage that transcends any political ideology. Managing a 50-year conflict requires intelligence from both sides, and some historians argue the Wallenbergs built exactly that, a network of operatives with access to both CIA and KGB operations, not to help either side win, but to manage the conflict's intensity. The goal isn't victory for either superpower, the goal is balance, preventing either side from winning too quickly or losing too completely, because the most profitable war is the one that never ends. But the ultimate control mechanism isn't weapons or money, it's information. And in the Cold War, whoever controls communications infrastructure controls the flow of intelligence itself. Ericsson telecommunication systems are deployed to both NATO command centers and Warsaw Pact military facilities, meaning the same Swedish company is building the secure communications infrastructure that both sides use to plan operations against each other. Intelligence experts point out the staggering implications. If the same family controls telecommunications on both sides of the Iron Curtain, they potentially have access to every military communication, every diplomatic cable, every strategic plan from both superpowers. The ultimate information advantage hiding behind Swedish neutrality. Direct superpower war would end too quickly, probably in nuclear annihilation, destroying markets and ending profits. But proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, Africa and Latin America, those could last for years, consuming weapons, technology and industrial equipment without ever threatening the suppliers. Evidence suggests systematic Wallenberg involvement in engineering these regional conflicts, not by causing the underlying tensions, but by ensuring both sides had the weapons and equipment to fight prolonged wars. Every regional conflict creates demand for arms from both superpowers, and those superpowers need Swedish ball bearings in their aircraft, Swedish steel in their weapons, Swedish industrial equipment in their factories. The proxy wars become profit centers, converting human suffering in developing nations into quarterly returns in Stockholm. The mathematical problem of prolonged conflict is simple. If one side gains too much technological advantage, the war ends. The Wallenbergs seem to have solved this problem through what researchers call systematic bidirectional technology transfer. When America develops new military technology, Swedish companies license it. When neutral Sweden exports to the Soviet bloc, that technology travels with it. When the Soviets innovate, the same process works in reverse. Some analysts argue this wasn't accidental leakage. It was deliberate policy to maintain the technological balance that kept both sides spending without either side winning. Industrial espionage as a business model, ensuring perpetual demand by preventing decisive advantage. The 1970s brings something dangerous to the business model. Hope, détente, the easing of Cold War tensions. Nixon and Brezhnev are actually talking. Arms control treaties are being signed. The war might actually end. But peace is catastrophic for those who profit from conflict. Financial records show a suspicious pattern during every peace breakthrough. Conflicts mysteriously reignite. Negotiations collapse. Tensions escalate just when resolutions seem possible. By every objective measure, the Cold War was a tremendous success for the Wallenberg Empire. Decades of managed conflict yielding generational wealth and unprecedented global influence. But systematic crisis profiteering exacts a personal price, even from the most powerful families. Even the architects of global systems can't escape the human cost of the machine they've built. Every time détente gains momentum, a new crisis emerges. Angola explodes into war, just as arms control makes progress. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan kills the SALT II treaty. Some researchers suggest these weren't coincidences, but systematic disruptions designed to prevent peace from eliminating profit. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union is dying. The command economy can't compete with Western innovation. The arms race is bankrupting them. Collapse is inevitable. Most Western analysts miss the signs, but the Wallenbergs don't. Financial records show their companies beginning to divest from Soviet bloc investments years before the collapse, repositioning assets toward Eastern European privatization opportunities. How did they know? Some analysts suggest it's not the intelligence, it's dependency. They controlled the supply lines. They watched the Soviet economy starve for critical components. They saw the collapse coming because they were quietly engineering it, choking off the technology transfers that had kept the Soviets competitive. The fall of communism wasn't a surprise to them. It was a business opportunity they had spent years preparing to exploit. November 1989, the Berlin Wall falls and crowds celebrate the end of tyranny. December 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves and the world celebrates the victory of democracy. 50 years of Cold War. Trillions spent on weapons that were never used. Millions dead in proxy wars across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The greatest ideological struggle in human history finally over. The Wallenberg Empire during this same period grew by an estimated 2,000%. Financial analysts calculate the family made hundreds of billions from 5 decades of managed conflict, proving that the most profitable war is the one that never quite ends, but never quite destroys your markets. They had perfected the model their grandfather started. Create dependency, engineer crisis, profit from chaos. The Cold War was their masterpiece. With the Cold War ended, the Wallenbergs faced their greatest challenge: peace. No conflict means no crisis. No crisis means no profit. But they've been planning for this. While managing the Cold War, they were already identifying the next enemy, one even better than communism, because it can never surrender, never negotiate, never be defeated. 10 years after the Cold War ends, they get it. An enemy that lives in shadows, that can be anywhere and everywhere, that justifies total surveillance and permanent military mobilization. The war on terror. And this time, the battlefield isn't Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia. It's everywhere. Every phone, every computer, every digital transaction, every human communication, because fighting an invisible enemy requires watching everyone all the time forever. And the Wallenbergs, they built the surveillance infrastructure that makes it possible. Ericsson telecommunications, digital monitoring systems, the technology of total control sold as the tools of security. They spent 50 years perfecting crisis engineering through military conflict. Now they are ready for something even more ambitious. Total surveillance justified by perpetual fear. The Cold War was practice. The war on terror is the masterpiece. And this time the dependency they are creating isn't just economic, it's digital, permanent, and all-encompassing. September 11th, 2001. The world changes forever. Nearly 3,000 people dead, a nation traumatized, and within hours, a new war is declared. But this war is different from anything that came before. No nation state to defeat, no capital to capture, no armistice to sign. This is the war on terror. An enemy that can be anywhere, that can never surrender, that can justify military action indefinitely. For most people, this means fear and uncertainty. But for those positioned to profit from security infrastructure, the pattern suggests this represented significant opportunity. Because if the Cold War taught the Wallenbergs anything, it's this: the most profitable enemy is the one you can fight forever without ever defeating. But here's what makes this war different. The Cold War needed tanks and missiles. The war on terror needs something else entirely. Information, data, surveillance. To fight an enemy that could be anyone, anywhere, you need to watch everyone, everywhere, all the time. And who builds the infrastructure that makes total surveillance possible? Well, one company in particular stands out. Ericsson, the Swedish telecommunications giant and one of the crown jewels of the Wallenberg Empire. In the decade following 9/11, Ericsson's government and defense contracts explode. They're building the telecommunications backbone for NATO, for the US military, for intelligence agencies across the Western world. The official story? Protecting citizens from terrorism. The reality? Creating the most comprehensive surveillance network in human history. Here's how it works. Every phone call, every text message, every internet search, it all flows through telecommunications infrastructure. And if you control that infrastructure, you control the information. But traditional telecommunications were just the beginning. The real transformation comes with 5G. 5G isn't just faster internet, it's the foundation for what some call the Internet of Things. Your car, your home, your medical devices, your financial transactions, all connected, all transmitting data, all the time. And Ericsson is one of the world's largest 5G infrastructure providers. They're not just building networks for phone calls anymore. They are building the nervous system of a totally connected, totally monitored society. Critics point to an unsettling pattern. The same family that profited from keeping the Cold War balanced for 50 years now controls critical infrastructure for Western surveillance systems. It's not about picking sides anymore. It's about being indispensable to the side that won. December 2019, a new virus emerges in Wuhan, China. Within months, the world is locked down, economies frozen, populations confined, the largest disruption to normal life since World War II. Once again, crisis creates opportunity. AstraZeneca, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, major producer of COVID-19 vaccines, and another key asset in the Wallenberg portfolio. During the pandemic, AstraZeneca secures billions in government contracts. The vaccines are distributed to millions. The profits extraordinary. But here's where the old playbook appears again. The same pattern from the Cold War. Create dependency, ensure continuation, maximize profit. Because the vaccines aren't just about health. They're the entry point for digital health passports, track and trace systems, digital IDs tied to your medical status. And what makes these systems work? Telecommunications infrastructure. The same infrastructure that Ericsson Ericsson provides. Some researchers see a pattern emerging. The war on terror justified permanent surveillance. The pandemic justified permanent health monitoring, both requiring infrastructure controlled by the same family interests. Let's look at the mathematics of modern crisis profiteering. It's evolved since the Cold War, but the principles remain the same. Step 1. Identify or cultivate a crisis that justifies emergency measures. Terrorism, pandemic, climate, the specifics don't matter. What matters is the response it enables. Step 2. Position yourself as essential to the solution. Build the infrastructure, provide the technology, become indispensable. Step 3. Ensure the crisis never fully resolves. There's always a new variant, a new threat, a new reason why emergency measures must continue. The data tells the story. Wallenberg holdings consistently show extraordinary growth during global crises, not despite the chaos, but because of it. The Cold War made billions. The war on terror made tens of billions. The pandemic, some estimates suggest hundreds of billions in value creation across their portfolio. But there's something fundamentally different about this era of control. The Cold War created military dependency. Both superpowers needed Swedish steel and technology to fight. Today's dependency is far more intimate, far more total. Your phone runs on networks they help control. Your money flows through banking systems they influence. Your health data sits in systems built on their infrastructure. It's not just governments that are dependent anymore. It's every individual, every transaction, every communication. The Cold War ended when the Soviet Union collapsed. But how do you end a war when the battlefield is digital life itself? When the infrastructure of control is woven into the fabric of modern existence? Here's what keeps critics up at night. During the Cold War, the Wallenbergs allegedly had intelligence access from both sides. Information advantage was their edge. Today, with telecommunications infrastructure that spans the globe, the potential scope of information access is exponentially greater. Edward Snowden revealed that intelligence agencies were tapping fiber optic cables, accessing vast amounts of private communications. But those cables, those networks, those switching stations, someone builds them, someone maintains them, and someone has access. We're not saying Ericsson engages in surveillance. They deny such activities, but the technical capability exists, and history suggests the Wallenberg family understands the value of information advantage. The war on terror gave them permanent surveillance. The pandemic gave them health monitoring, both justified by crisis. Both built on infrastructure they control. But to understand how deep this really goes, we need to look at the full scope of the modern Wallenberg empire. Because telecommunications and pharmaceuticals, that's just the beginning. The true power lies in how these pieces fit together. A system so integrated, so essential to modern life, that it becomes impossible to imagine the world functioning without it. Welcome to the Wallenberg empire of the 21st century. Stockholm. From the outside it looks like any other modern European capital. Sleek office buildings, prosperous citizens, a functioning democracy. But beneath the surface, one family's influence touches nearly every aspect of Swedish and global economic life. The modern Wallenberg empire isn't built on secret deals in smoke-filled rooms anymore. Today it's structured through foundations, holding companies, and a web of corporate control so complex that even experts struggle to map it completely. At the center sits Investor AB, the family's flagship holding company, publicly traded but controlled by the Wallenberg foundations. It's a brilliant structure, the appearance of public ownership, the reality of family control. The foundations own the controlling shares, the family sits on the foundation boards, and Swedish law gives them special voting rights that magnify their control far beyond their actual ownership percentage. In some holdings, they own less than 10% of the equity but control over 40% of the votes. It's perfectly legal and perfectly effective. So what do they actually control? Let's start with what you can see. AstraZeneca, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. Market cap over $200 billion. The Wallenbergs helped establish what became AstraZeneca and maintain significant influence. During COVID-19, AstraZeneca became a household name. Their vaccine went to over 180 countries, billions in government contracts. But here's what most people miss. The vaccines were just the entry point. The real value, the digital health infrastructure that came with them. Track and trace systems, digital health passports, medical data collection at unprecedented scale. Then there's Ericsson. We've talked about their 5G dominance, but the scope is even broader. They don't just build cell towers. They provide end-to-end network solutions for over 1,000 networks in 180 countries. If you made a phone call today, it probably touched Ericsson infrastructure somewhere along the way. Their technology powers military communications, intelligence gathering, border security systems, the infrastructure of control hiding in plain sight as consumer convenience. Not just the car company that's long gone. Today, Saab AB is a major defense contractor, fighter aircraft, missile systems, surveillance technology. The Gripen fighter jet exported to multiple nations. But here's the interesting part. Each sale includes long-term service contracts, spare parts, upgrades, creating decades of dependency on Swedish expertise and Wallenberg-controlled supply chains. SEB, one of Northern Europe's largest banks, where the Wallenberg story began nearly 2 centuries ago. Today, it's not just a bank, it's a financial intelligence network, managing assets for the wealthiest families in Europe, processing billions in daily transactions, seeing money flows that reveal economic trends before they become public knowledge. Their private banking division serves the ultra-wealthy, the kind of clients who move markets, and when you manage their money, you know their plans before they execute them. Atlas Copco, less glamorous than pharmaceuticals or telecommunications, but arguably more essential. They make the machines that make everything else. Mining equipment, industrial compressors, manufacturing automation, the foundation of industrial production. Every electric vehicle battery, every computer chip, every piece of modern infrastructure, somewhere in the supply chain, Atlas Copco equipment played a role. It's the ultimate upstream position. Control the tools of production and you influence everything that flows downstream. But here's where it gets interesting. These aren't just separate companies. They're designed to work together, to reinforce each other's power. Ericsson builds telecommunications infrastructure. That infrastructure carries health data for AstraZeneca's digital systems. SEB finances the equipment purchases from Atlas Copco. Saab provides security for critical facilities. Some analysts call it the spheres system. Different family members oversee different sectors, but they all support the same central objective: maintain and expand Wallenberg influence. Jacob Wallenberg sits on the Investor AB board. His cousin chairs the foundation board. Another family member influences SEB's strategy. It looks distributed, it's actually highly coordinated. Let's go back to COVID-19 for a moment, because what looked like a public health crisis was also the perfect stress test of the modern Wallenberg system. March 2020, lockdowns begin. AstraZeneca starts vaccine development. Ericsson sees explosion in demand for network infrastructure as everyone works from home. Atlas Copco supplies equipment for emergency medical facilities. By the end of 2021, the companies in the Wallenberg sphere saw combined market value increase by an estimated $100 billion. Coincidence, or the result of a portfolio specifically designed to profit from exactly this kind of crisis? But the real shift wasn't just profit, it was acceleration. COVID-19 compressed 10 years of digital transformation into 10 months. Remote work, digital payments, telemedicine, online education, contact tracing, all requiring infrastructure that the Wallenberg empire helps provide.
The pandemic didn't create new dependencies, it made existing ones visible and permanent.
January 2024, Davos, Switzerland. The World Economic Forum's annual meeting. Among the attendees, Marcus Wallenberg, representing the family's interests, rubbing shoulders with heads of state, tech CEOs, central bankers. The WEF is often dismissed as just a networking event for the global elite, but look closer at what actually happens there. Klaus Schwab, WEF founder, talks about stakeholder capitalism and the Great Reset, concepts that sound abstract until you realize what they mean in practice. Public-private partnerships, corporate influence over government policy, the blurring of lines between state power and corporate interests. And who's positioned perfectly for this world? Families like the Wallenbergs, who've spent centuries mastering the art of private-public collaboration. The WEF's Young Global Leaders program has included some familiar names: Emmanuel Macron, Jacinta Ardern, Mark Zuckerberg, leaders who've then implemented policies remarkably aligned with WEF recommendations. The Wallenbergs don't need to attend every meeting. They've spent decades building relationships with the people who do. But here's how they maintain power while avoiding scrutiny. Foundations, philanthropy, the appearance of giving back. The Wallenberg Foundations donate hundreds of millions to research, education, culture. On the surface, it's admirable, but look at what they fund. Telecommunications research, biomedical studies, industrial innovation. Basically, the foundations fund research that benefits companies in the Wallenberg portfolio. It's brilliant! Get tax benefits for donations, develop intellectual property through university research, then commercialize it through your own companies. And there's another benefit. When you fund major research institutions, you gain influence over what gets studied, what gets published, what narratives become accepted as truth. Some critics call it academic capture. The foundations aren't suppressing research directly, they're just heavily funding certain types of inquiry while others struggle for resources. Compare the Wallenbergs to American billionaires. Elon Musk tweets constantly. Jeff Bezos owns newspapers. Bill Gates is a media fixture. The Wallenbergs? You barely see them. Rare interviews, minimal social media, no reality shows, no public feuds. Esse non videri, to be, not to seem. The family motto isn't just words, it's operational strategy. And it helps when you have influence over Swedish media. Not ownership necessarily, just relationships. Shared board members, advertising revenue, the subtle pressures that shape coverage. Result? A family controlling $275 billion in assets receives a fraction of the scrutiny that individual billionaires with far less power face daily. The dynasty continues. The next generation is already in position. Jacob Wallenberg, Marcus Wallenberg, they are not the founders. They are sixth generation, and they've adapted the model perfectly for the modern era. Less about secret deals, more about strategic positioning. Less about controlling companies outright, more about controlling the infrastructure those companies depend on. They speak the language of modern capitalism. Sustainability, stakeholder value, corporate responsibility, all while maintaining the same fundamental objective their ancestors had: generational power. So we've seen the companies, the connections, the influence, but that's just the visible structure. The real question is, how do they maintain this level of control across generations? How does a family stay powerful for nearly 2 centuries while others rise and fall within decades? The answer lies in something more fundamental than wealth or corporate holdings. It's about the system itself, the invisible architecture of power that makes the Wallenbergs not just rich, but essential. That's what we need to explore next. A spider doesn't catch its prey through strength. It builds a web and then it waits. The Wallenbergs have spent 170 years building a web, not of silk, but of dependencies, obligations, and structural advantages so deeply embedded in Swedish and global systems that removing them would cause everything to collapse. This is how you turn temporary wealth into permanent power. In Sweden, they call it spheres of influence. Different families traditionally control different sectors of the economy. The Wallenbergs just happen to control the most important ones. But it goes deeper than just owning companies. It's about actual network effects, about being the node that connects everything else. Look at Swedish corporate boards. The same names appear again and again. Not always Wallenberg family members directly, but people who came up through Wallenberg companies, who owe their positions to Wallenberg support. A young executive starts at Investor AB, proves themselves, gets moved to a portfolio company, then to a board seat at another company, eventually maybe even a government appointment. At each step, they understand where their loyalty lies, not stated explicitly, just understood. Sweden is a democracy, free elections, peaceful transfers of power. But some critics ask, who really governs? Look at Swedish political leadership over the past 50 years. Prime ministers, finance ministers, central bank governors. An unusual number have either worked for Wallenberg companies or have close family connections to the sphere. The pattern is subtle but consistent. Politicians serve their terms, then take lucrative positions at Wallenberg-affiliated companies. Or executives from the sphere move into government, then return to higher positions afterward. It's not corruption in the traditional sense. No bribes, no explicit quid pro quo. Just a shared understanding of how the system works. And look at Swedish policy over the decades. Banking regulations that favor the existing players, telecommunication policies that advantage Ericsson, defense contracts that flow to Saab. Each decision can be justified individually. Collectively, they create an environment where Wallenberg interests consistently thrive. But political control is temporary. Politicians come and go. What the Wallenbergs have built is something more lasting, influence over the institutions that shape how people think. The Stockholm School of Economics, Sweden's most prestigious business school. The Wallenberg family has been deeply connected since its founding. Future Swedish business leaders study there, future politicians, future central bankers, and what they learn shapes how they see the world. Not crude propaganda, just a particular view of how economies should work. The proper role of private enterprise, the importance of established institutions, the value of stability over disruption. Graduates don't leave as Wallenberg loyalists, they leave with a worldview that happens to align with Wallenberg interests. And then there's the research. Remember those Wallenberg foundations? They're not just charitable, they're strategic. Hundreds of millions flowing to specific areas. Telecommunications, life sciences, industrial innovation, areas where Wallenberg companies operate. The research gets published in prestigious journals, gets cited in policy debates, becomes the objective evidence that justifies policies that benefit the companies that funded the research. It's not a conspiracy, it's just how systems work when one family has been shaping them for long enough. Sweden has a free press, no state ownership, no state censorship, no jailed journalists, but freedom of the press doesn't mean independence from influence. The Wallenbergs don't own major Swedish newspapers directly anymore. They don't need to. But Wallenberg companies are major advertisers. Their banks finance media companies. Their executives sit on media foundation boards. No one picks up the phone and says, "Don't run that story." They don't have to. Editors understand that persistent criticism of major advertisers has consequences. Result: Swedish media extensively covers individual scandals when they occur, but systematic questions about Wallenberg power, those stories are surprisingly rare. And internationally, almost total silence. The Wallenbergs are barely mentioned in global media. No profiles in Forbes, no TED Talks, no controversial tweets attracting attention. When you own the infrastructure everyone depends on, you don't need positive media coverage, you just need absence of negative coverage. And that they've mastered. Here's where it gets really sophisticated. Forget politicians and newspapers. The real power lies in the boring stuff, regulations, technical standards, the rules that determine how markets function. Take telecommunication regulations in the EU. Who do you think helps draft the technical standards? Engineers from companies like Ericsson, because who else has the expertise? The regulations appear neutral, technically complex, decided by experts, but those experts often work for the companies being regulated. Result? Standards that happen to favor existing infrastructure, that make it harder for newcomers to compete, that protect market leaders while appearing to promote competition. Same pattern in banking. Who advises the Swedish Financial Supervisory Authority on banking regulations? Often people from SEB and other major banks. They are not corrupt, they are genuinely trying to create good policy, but their assumptions about what constitutes sound banking practice happen to align with models that benefit the institutions they come from. But all of this, the political influence, the media relationships, the regulatory capture, it only works because of something more fundamental: structural dependency. Sweden's telecommunications infrastructure, its major defense systems, its largest pharmaceutical companies, its industrial equipment manufacturers, these aren't just important companies. They are systems critical to how modern Sweden functions. Imagine the Swedish government decided to truly challenge Wallenberg power, to break up the sphere. What happens? Telecommunications networks need restructuring. Defense supply chains get disrupted. Pharmaceutical research loses funding. Industrial exports face uncertainty. Thousands of jobs at risk, pension funds exposed, international confidence shaken. It's not that you can't challenge them, it's that the cost of doing so exceeds what any democratic system will tolerate. They've made themselves too big to fail, not through size alone, but through interconnection, through becoming essential infrastructure. And here's how they ensure this continues. Talent. Every year, the Wallenberg sphere recruits the brightest graduates from Sweden's top universities. They offer the best jobs, the most challenging work, the fastest career progression. If you're ambitious and talented in Sweden, you have two choices: join the Wallenberg system and rise quickly, or stay outside and wonder why your career is moving slowly. Not everyone accepts. Some maintain independence, but enough do that each generation. The sphere gets the talent it needs to perpetuate itself. And they don't just hire them, they develop them. Leadership programs, international rotations, exposure to different parts of the sphere. By the time someone reaches senior leadership, they've internalized the system. They understand how it works, what serves it, what threatens it. They become willing participants in their own integration into the structure. But Sweden is small, just 10 million people. How does a Swedish family maintain global influence? Through something brilliant. They don't try to control everything directly. They become essential nodes in global networks. Ericsson partners with American tech giants on 5G, shares technology, integrates systems. They don't compete with Silicon Valley. They become infrastructure Silicon Valley depends on. AstraZeneca collaborates with American and British pharmaceutical companies. Joint research, shared distribution. They are not trying to dominate alone. They are making sure they are essential to whatever dominates. And Wallenberg representatives sit on boards of major international corporations, not as controlling shareholders, as trusted advisors, as connectors between European and American business. They've learned from history. Direct control invites resistance. Being indispensable, that's something people will protect. But maybe the most important part of the system, it's designed to survive crisis, to adapt, to emerge stronger. Every major crisis of the past century, the Wallenbergs have emerged with more power, not less. World War I, they supplied all sides. World War II, collaboration with Nazis followed by quiet rehabilitation. Cold War, positioned between both superpowers. 2008 financial crisis, their banks needed less bailout support than others. COVID-19, perfectly positioned for the digital transformation. It's not luck, it's systems design. They maintain diverse holdings across sectors. If one industry struggles, others compensate. They avoid direct political exposure. If governments change, their position doesn't. And critically, they've made themselves useful to whoever holds power. Democratic governments need their infrastructure. Autocratic ones would too. The political system doesn't matter, the dependency does. Most wealthy families lose their fortunes within 3 generations. The Wallenbergs are on generation 7 and stronger than ever. How? First, they separate family from business. Family members don't automatically get executive positions. They have to prove themselves, often outside the sphere first. But once proven, they are placed strategically. Different family members in different sectors, coordinated but not concentrated. If one fails, the system continues. And they think in generations, not quarters, investments that won't pay off for 20 years, relationships that won't matter until the next crisis, patience that comes from knowing your family has centuries, not just your career. So we've seen the web, the political capture, the academic influence, the media relationships, the regulatory control, the dependency architecture. All of it designed not just to make money, but to ensure that the making of money continues forever. But there's one more question. Where is this going? What does the future look like when one family has spent 170 years perfecting the art of crisis profiteering and structural control? Because if you think what they've built so far is impressive, wait until you see what they are preparing for next. The ultimate endgame, and whether anyone can stop it. Imagine a world where every transaction is digital, every communication monitored, every movement tracked, every decision influenced by algorithms controlled by a handful of companies. For most people, this sounds like dystopian science fiction. For the Wallenbergs, it's the business plan. The pandemic accelerated trends that were already in motion. Cash disappearing, digital payments becoming default, physical documents replaced by digital IDs. And now, central banks worldwide are developing their own digital currencies. Not cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, government-controlled digital money. Every transaction traceable, every account controllable. Who builds the infrastructure for this? Companies like those in the Wallenberg sphere. Banking systems, telecommunications networks, security protocols. They are not pushing for digital currencies directly. They're just making sure that when it happens, and it will, the infrastructure runs through systems they influence. Think about the control this enables. In a cash society, you can't track every transaction. In a digital currency system, the infrastructure provider sees everything, knows everything, not just what you buy, but patterns, social connections based on payment flows, political affiliations revealed by donations, health status inferred from medical purchases. The Cold War gave them information advantage through telecommunications. The digital currency era gives them insights into human behavior at the granular level never before possible. But digital currencies are just the beginning. The real transformation is artificial intelligence. The Wallenberg Foundations are pouring billions into AI research, not the consumer-facing stuff you hear about, the industrial applications, the infrastructure intelligence, AI that optimizes telecommunications networks, that predicts equipment failures in manufacturing, that processes medical data for pharmaceutical research, that analyzes financial transactions for banking. Notice the pattern? Every AI application reinforces existing Wallenberg holdings, makes them more efficient, more essential, harder to replace. And here's what keeps some researchers up at night. AI systems need training data, massive amounts of it. Where does that data come from? Telecommunications networks that Ericsson helps run, medical records that AstraZeneca systems process, financial transactions flowing through SEB, industrial operations monitored by Atlas Copco equipment. They're not just building AI, they're controlling the data that trains it. And whoever controls the training data controls what the AI learns, what it optimizes for, whose interests it serves. Climate change is the new global crisis, and we've seen this pattern before. Crisis creates opportunity. especially for those positioned to profit from the solution. The Wallenbergs sphere has significant investments in green technology, wind power infrastructure, electric vehicle components, carbon capture systems, and look at climate policies being proposed worldwide, carbon credits, green infrastructure mandates, electric vehicle requirements, each one creating demand for technologies that Wallenberg companies provide. Some environmental advocates celebrate this. Finally, they say corporate interests align with environmental necessity. But critics point out something uncomfortable. The climate policies being pushed hardest aren't necessarily the most effective environmentally. They're the ones that require the most infrastructure, the most industrial transformation, the most dependency on new systems. Simple solutions: consume less, live more locally, reduce complexity. Those don't require much infrastructure, don't create dependency, and they don't generate profit. But complex technological solutions, smart grids, carbon capture, massive renewable installations, those need equipment, need financing, need telecommunications to manage them, need everything the Wallenberg sphere provides. The Cold War was about managing conflict. The climate crisis is about managing salvation. And in both cases, the Wallenbergs position themselves as indispensable to the solution. But perhaps their most ambitious bet is on something even more fundamental: human biology itself. AstraZeneca isn't just making vaccines anymore. They're at the forefront of genetic medicine, gene therapy, personalized medicine based on individual genetic profiles. And Wallenberg foundations fund research into life extension, cognitive enhancement, the merger of human biology and technology. For most people, this sounds like progress. Curing diseases, extending healthy life. Who could oppose that? But consider the implications. In a world where your health depends on proprietary genetic therapies, you don't just depend on pharmaceutical companies for treatment, you depend on them for life itself. In a world where cognitive enhancement becomes normal, those without access fall behind, creating a biological divide reinforced by economic inequality. The Cold War created military dependency. The digital age created information dependency. The transhuman future creates biological dependency. And who's positioned to control access to life-extending, performance-enhancing biotechnology? The same families that have spent centuries perfecting the art of controlled dependency. But to understand where this is really going, we need to look at the broader vision, what Klaus Schwab and the WEF call stakeholder capitalism, what some call the Great Reset. The idea is simple. Traditional capitalism is inefficient. Democratic governance is too slow. What we need is partnership between enlightened corporations and streamlined government. Public-private partnerships making decisions too complex for voters to understand. Technical experts drawn from corporate sectors, managing systems too important to leave to politics. It sounds reasonable when framed as efficiency, but look at what it means in practice. Corporations writing regulations for their own industries. Companies running public infrastructure for profit. Technical decisions removing issues from democratic control. And who thrives in the system? Families like the Wallenbergs, who've spent centuries building exactly this model. They've been doing public-private partnerships since Andrei Oskar Wallenberg advised Swedish royalty while running his bank. This isn't new, it's just finally becoming formalized as the official system. Let's connect the pieces. Digital currency running on infrastructure they influence, AI trained on data from their systems, climate solutions requiring their technology, biotech creating health dependencies, technocratic governance elevating corporate power. Each piece seems separate. Together they form something unprecedented, a system where human life, economic, physical, social, even biological, runs through infrastructure controlled by a handful of interests. You can't opt out of digital currency if it's the only legal payment method. Can't avoid AI if it controls job allocation. Can't escape climate infrastructure if governments mandate it. Can't refuse biotech if it becomes medically necessary. The Cold War kept both sides spending through fear of the other. The future system keeps everyone dependent through control of what you need to live. Remember Mark Wallenberg, found dead by a Swedish lake in 1971. The official story? Suicide. The whispered alternative? A man who knew too much and couldn't live with it. He's not alone. Over the decades there have been others. Journalists who dug too deep. Regulators who asked uncomfortable questions. Politicians who proposed breaking up concentrations of power. Some faced ruined careers. Some faced legal troubles. Some, like Mark, simply disappeared from the story. The system protects itself, not usually through violence, too obvious, through marginalization, through career destruction, through making resistance so costly that few attempt it. So can it be stopped? Can a system this entrenched, this essential, this sophisticated be challenged? Some believe yes, through transparency, through democratic mobilization and building alternative systems that don't depend on concentrated infrastructure. Decentralized technology that can't be controlled. Local economies less dependent on global systems. Open source alternatives to proprietary infrastructure. The tools exist. The question is whether enough people recognize the need before the dependencies become absolute. But here's the hard truth. The Wallenbergs aren't stupid. They've spent 170 years planning for resistance. Every alternative that gains traction either gets acquired, regulated out of existence, or simply can't scale without using infrastructure they control. It's not impossible to challenge them, it's just that the system is designed to make a successful challenge require more coordination, more resources, and more sustained effort than human movements typically achieve. So we're left with a choice, not between good and evil, that's too simple, but between different versions of the future. One vision: efficient systems managed by technical experts, AI optimization, digital integration, biotech enhancement, and a world where complex problems are solved by those with expertise and resources, where crises are managed by those positioned to manage them. It's orderly, functional, and completely removes meaningful choice from ordinary people's lives. The alternative? Messier democratic systems, less efficient markets, slower technological adoption, but also more local control, more genuine choice, more space for lives not optimized by algorithms. It's chaotic, sometimes inefficient, but human agency remains. The Wallenbergs aren't forcing you to choose their vision, they're just making it the path of least resistance, the default, the inevitable. Every convenience you accept, every app you download, every digital service you adopt, each one a small vote for the infrastructure they control. Not because they're forcing you, because they've made the alternative inconvenient enough that most won't bother. So let's return to where we started. Bilderberg 2024, Madrid. The Wallenbergs at a table with the world's most powerful people. But now you understand, they're not here to receive instructions. They're there because they control infrastructure everyone else depends on. From their grandfather who saw opportunity in crisis profiteering, through Nazi collaboration, through Cold War balancing, through the war on terror, through the pandemic, each generation perfecting the model. Create dependency, engineer crisis, profit from the solution. Become essential, repeat. Some see the Wallenbergs as a family that built success through intelligence and adaptation. Others see systematic exploitation of human suffering. The evidence supports both interpretations. They did finance Swedish industry. They did create employment. They did support innovation. Those things are true. They also profited from genocide. They did maintain conflict for financial gain. They did build systems of dependency that limit human freedom. Those things are also true. The question isn't whether the facts are correct. The question is what you do with the information. Right now, someone in New York is making a phone call on an Ericsson network. Someone in London is taking medicine developed by AstraZeneca. Someone in Berlin is using equipment made by Atlas Copco. They don't know the Wallenberg name. They don't see the system, but they are part of it. We all are. The Wallenbergs built their empire on a simple bet that most people won't look closely enough, won't ask hard enough questions, won't organize effectively enough to challenge structures they depend on. For 170 years, that bet has paid off. Whether it continues to pay off, that's up to you.